So today's mission is to create a NAT gateway in Azure. We're gonna associate this to a subnet where we have a virtual machine living, and we're gonna make sure that we use this NAT gateway to traverse the interwebs. We're gonna do everything using Terraform, of course. But why are we doing this? So the main reason is I think it is the 30th of September 2025, Microsoft Azure will retire their old or default way of accessing the internet, the implicit way of accessing the internet. But before we dive too deep into what we're going to do and why we're doing it, I would like to get on the same page about two expressions that are often referred to in the Microsoft documentation. So one of those words are implicit. So think implied, suggested, though not directly expressed. What it means in this context is they want you to think about your way of accessing the internet. So right now, if I spin up a virtual machine, it just kind of can access the internet. It uses an IP that's owned by Microsoft, but I have no way of guaranteeing that this will remain the same if my machine reboots. And in a production setting, that's like pretty chaotic. And the other part that they talk about a lot is explicit. So explicit is like the opposite of this, which is stated clearly and in detail, leaving no room for confusion or doubt. We, the Azure administrator, we take a decision on how our virtual machines or other workloads are supposed to access the internet. So even if we don't design the best, or we don't set up the best design, at least we have taken a decision on how we access the internet and maybe also how we allow access into our network. I swear this will be a tech video eventually. And this is what's going away, and we like that. We don't like this implicit, the default way of setting up internet access. But what are some explicit ways, I guess, you could say that this is how I want to access the internet? Some explicit declarative ways, maybe. One way you can take is you can provision a NAT gateway, a network address translation gateway, which is what we will show you in this video. And this is by far the easiest to set up. You don't have to worry about many things. Like, you can set it up, you can attach it to a subnet, and I don't even think you have to do anything with any user-defined routes or anything like that. It kind of takes precedence over a lot of things when you associate a NAT gateway to a subnet. And we also don't have to worry about, or we don't have to worry much at least, about things such as source network address, translation port exhaustion. That's a mouthful. We could use a public load balancer instead. This is much more complex to set up because you kind of have to configure this yourself. You have to make sure that you are pre-allocating the source network address translation ports, the SNAT ports that you want to use, and specific backend pools will have to have these ports pre-allocated. But you would have much more control, which I guess is a positive. But usually when I'm thinking about the load balancer, or if I'm thinking about an application gateway, I'm usually thinking about inbound traffic or ingress. Like, I am publishing a service out on the internet and I want them to access it on this port. And with the application gateway being layer 7, for example, I could say that if the request comes in and it has this in its URL or this in its host name, then I want you to go to this backend pool. But if you're coming with like slash shop instead, I want you to go somewhere else. Like, you could do things like that. So for dealing with outbound traffic, I would much prefer like an Azure Firewall instead of a load balancer if you're gonna do this sort of upgrade from the NAT gateway anyways. And so speaking of the firewall, you absolutely can deploy an Azure Firewall, which is, in most enterprise settings, you wouldn't have an Azure Firewall or a NVA, network virtual appliance. That could be, maybe you're using Cisco, their next generation firewalls, or maybe you have Palo Alto or something like that. Some of these products have Azure Marketplace offerings, so you can purchase them as a SaaS and you can deploy them, and some of it is like a managed service, so they're a little bit easier to configure that way. And then I think this will still work. You could purchase a standard public IP address. You could attach this on your virtual machine NIC, but I mean, this is explicit if you do it because you are intentionally doing it. But why? Like, I can't think of a reason why you would want to do this. Maybe you have a reason, so tell me, but I would prefer not doing it this way. It would be much better having a NAT gateway, I guess, instead. I mean, if you want to have more than one public IP address that you will want to be able to NAT from, and I mean, you can't really attach two public IP addresses to one virtual machine NIC, I don't think, so it doesn't really scale well, is what I'm getting at. Now, there are probably better ways to explain this. I'm not a network technician. Mainly, I do know some networking, but I think that's enough talking, so let's get into some terraforming. Alright, so we can get started, and like we usually do, we have to declare a Terraform block. I guess I should start even further back and say, whenever I create a new folder or a new project for this, I usually start with a main.tf and outputs.tf, although I don't always use it. I just, by habit, I create it. And then we have a variables.tf where we will declare some variables, which we can actually do right away, because I know we have some variables that we kind of always want to use. So environment is the first one. And we have Copilot with us today, that's awesome. I also like to use location and location short. Yeah. This guy has coded with me before. Then we usually set a few more variables, one which I usually call common name, or like it's the common denominator for this type of deployment that we're making. Since this project and this video is about internet access, I guess we could do something like that. And not the common name for the certificate, but this is kind of what I like about Copilot. So it gave me, I didn't have to type everything manually. It didn't give me what I wanted, but it gave me like the boilerplating for most of what I wanted, so I could just change this. So the common name for the deployment, let's say. And we can say actually a default value for this one, which will be we can call it, I don't know, web access. So we have a few variables. I feel quite good about these. I'm thinking right quickly in my head. I feel like I'm missing one, but yeah, we'll figure that out. So if you noticed back in main.tf, you also maybe could see that this time I'm using a different provider when setting up this Terraform project. And this one, AZ Identity. I actually work with Simon Gottschalk. He's a he's a cloud native MVP, Azure MVP, and a good friend of mine. And he is pretty much awesome at everything that has to do with technology and computers for anything. He will tell you he's not, but that's a lie. But he's written this provider at least, which is it's building on this. We made a video a while ago about ephemeral resources and not persisting some things to state. And this is a super neat way for me to be able to provide the subscription ID. I actually use the Azure CLI account that I'm authenticated with. I can just declare it here as an ephemeral resource, and I don't have to provide any subscription IDs into any variable blocks or variable files, and it's not gonna be like, I don't have to worry about a lot of things. I don't know how you guys feel about subscription IDs. Like when I used to write on the blog, for example, I would usually hide the subscription ID, although I did learn a while ago that some people say that the subscription ID is like the address to your house. It's not the keys to the door. I don't know if it's really a big deal to have it or not. For the first few videos I've included it because like I kind of had to, because of the videos we were making. It just made most sense doing it that way. But I've rambled on enough about this. So let's create some resources. We do want to create a resource group first of all. We'll name it this, and this is maybe a good time to talk about this. I'm sorry, we're gonna get into the coding soon, but you're maybe wondering why I'm calling certain resources this. For that, I would like to actually reference a source that I think is very good. If you go here, we do Terraform naming conventions. And there's the Terraform best practices. So there is this concept of you wouldn't name your dog, and what I mean by this is exactly what they explain in this video, what they explain on this website. So here you can see they are declaring a AWS route table, and the proper way to do it is this way. You just declare that it is a resource, it's a route table, and this is a public route table. And the reason for doing this is that there's no need to do what they're doing down here, because you're already declaring that it is a route table by saying that the resource is a route table. You don't have to say that it is a route table in the symbolic name of the resource as well. And the same for this one. It's like AWS route table. You already have route table in the resource name. You don't have to specify it here in the symbolic name. So here it makes more sense, because if you were using more than one route table in your Terraform state list, in the lines you would have several resources of AWS route table. When you're viewing your state, it would look like this. And if you only had one of these types of resources, it doesn't really matter. You don't have to delineate them from the rest of them. But here you could potentially have more than one route table. So one would be public, one would be for private, one would be for another DMZ, and one would be for, I don't know, something else. And so this is kind of what we're getting at, that if you're reading the resources, it makes it a lot easier to reference these resources when they have specific name, and like you don't have to repeat yourself as much. So we want to be efficient, we don't want to rewrite things all the time. But anyway, so that's why. So in this configuration, I may only have this one resource group. I will just call it this, because I don't have a more specific name for it. If in this configuration I would deploy a second resource group, I would need to delineate them to or differentiate them to in some way, then I would do this. But anyways, we have to provide some properties here. And this is, which we may have seen other videos, I like to do the string interpolation. Yeah, like I mentioned, this guy has coded with me before, and I want the location. So this would translate into RG. Var environment would be, let's say we are deploying into prod, and location short will be SC, since I'm in Sweden Central. And I want the common name. So the common name is, we've declared like a default value, so it'll be web access unless we say otherwise. Though we don't have default values for these other things, so we have to actually set that up. And I usually create a new folder and a TF-vars file. We said prod TF-vars, right? So prod, location, yeah. We could declare the common name, but I just spent a lot of time talking about not repeating ourselves, so let's not do that. So what I want to establish for this test is I want to just create a virtual machine, and I want you to just see, like, if we don't do anything specific, what will happen to the virtual machine? Like, how will it look in the portal? Or what will it look like in the portal? And creating a virtual machine, if you're learning infrastructure as code, is actually a very good thing, because you're not just creating the virtual machine. You have to create the network interface card. You need to have a network, like a VNet and a subnet where you're gonna place this in. You may have to configure the disks. Like, there's a lot of things you have to do. And to make this a bit more readable, we'll actually create a new file for it. So we first need to create a network interface card. Again, I think this will be the only one, so I'll just call it this. And yeah, we could go with Copilot here, but so let's flesh it out. So I usually copy the name property from something else where I want to use the string interpolation, and it's not a resource group then, so it's a NIC. Then we have to supply some things like a resource group name, and the location. We can do the same. What else does this usually want? I guess it wants, yeah, the IP configuration. So for the sake of time, I'll actually just accept this as is. Now you notice this is not going to work. We don't have a subnet here. We actually don't have a virtual network either. So I kind of jumped the gun. We actually have to declare those first. So let's do that, but I'll do that in the main.tf. So if we go back here, the like, maybe you're wondering why he's jumping back and forth between different files. I try to keep the files to a minimum. I try to work in the main.tf for as long as I can. I just know that the VM resource is composed of a lot of resources, so I just know right off the bat that I kind of want it in its own place. But these ones should be better, so again, for the name, we can do shamelessly steal from our previous work. Yep. We want that, and then we want an address space. I'll say this is actually, let's be good citizens. That's good enough for us. So that's our virtual network. People learning infrastructure code tell me that it takes a lot of time compared to just clicking in the portal, but come on, you see how quick this goes. So anyways, and we wanted a subnet. Now this is also a good example of what I was talking about earlier. We may need more than one subnet. So this could be the internal subnet, and this then would be the external subnet, for example. So then they are not named this. I'll soon be finished with that. So yeah, we want to name. I'm gonna make this easy on myself. We'll do SN. It'll be to this resource group. Doesn't have location, right? So it wants a virtual network, I know this. And we need to supply this. I think that's everything. So we have a network, a virtual network, we have a subnet. We can go back into here and you can see that this now is completely blue, indicating that it's actually working. So we can continue fleshing out our virtual machine. So for the VM itself, I'm actually gonna steal. So we're gonna go to the providers, go to Azure. We can go into the documentation. Virtual machine. I can see I have a Azure RM Linux virtual machine. That's perfect. I will steal this block. And back in here, I'm just gonna send it. There's another pro tip. If you want to change a lot of values at the same time, you could, on Windows, I guess it's Control-Shift-L, but on Mac it'll be, for me, I'm using a little bit of a weird keyboard, but I guess it's Command-Shift-L. And you can see all of these examples, they highlight up. So if I change this, I can change everywhere, which is pretty neat. If I didn't want to do that, maybe I just wanted to change like these first three. You could do it with a mouse click, like double click and then hold Alt and double click the next one and the next one. And you can change those. Although if you're a completionist like me and you don't want to use your mouse too much, you can do, I guess it's Command down. Sorry, Command D for down and then Control down on Windows. If I do Command D, it goes down. If I do two more, I get the last two. And we can do that. That's the tip of the day. We're not going to use the admin SSH key for this. We're not going to log into this VM, so this doesn't matter too much. But we are going to set a password. So if we go back into our variables.tf and let's create a variable for that. Password for the admin user is a string and sensitive is true. And we know now from the ephemeral video I made that sensitive equals true just means that the plan file and like the output in the terminal, it'll just say sensitive value. So back in our virtual machine or our virtual machine configuration, we can set the admin password. If we are going to use an admin password and not the SSH key, we have to disable, I forget, it's, yeah, disable password authentication. We have to set this to false. This is by default true. The OS disk can be read-write for its caching, standard, locally redundant, that's fine. And we like Ubuntu, so we do that. Yeah, I think this is it. And back in our main.tf, we just have our network configuration. So I think we are ready to jump into the terminal. All right, so in the terminal, we can see we have our files. If we check it out quickly, we can see, yep, this is what I wrote just now. So let's initialize this. Great, so I messed up, so what I have to actually do is make sure I use the variables folder that we so carefully crafted. And it's prod.tf4, so remember. We still have to supply this one though. You can see the AZ identity provider is opening and reading my subscription and AZ account details. Maybe I should make a more in-depth video about the provider. I think it's super cool. I love it. But our plan looks good. So it's wanting to create a virtual machine. It's gonna be inside the rgprod SE. That's not correct. This should be SC. Back in our prod.tf4. Yep, I messed up. I guess it's good we run apply. Or I guess it's good that we ran a plan. And I think this will be good. We are creating a network interface, NIC prod SC web access, it'll be later. And we have our resource group and we have our network configuration. So let's apply this. And we have to say yes. Okay, seems we had a great success. Our apply is complete. We have 5 resources added. So let's go check it out. So inside the portal, I know the keyword for this is web access. So we have our resource group and we can see that we have our network interface card, our machine. Oh, I actually messed up. I forgot to fix the name of the virtual machine. I guess this is why it's good to have a dev environment and you deploy there first. Yeah, so let's pretend that didn't happen. That's a little bit embarrassing. But if we go into the machine, we can see if we go to the network settings, we only have the one network interface card. We do have a private IP address, though we do not have a public IP. So there's no public IP address attached to this. So what we can do is we can go into run command. We can do run shell script. And one would think that, yeah, since we don't have a public IP, we don't have anything front facing, this shouldn't work, but you'd be surprised. And well, what do you know? We do actually have a public IP address. So me sending curl to ipinfo.io is the same as me go into it in the web browser. It'll display what public IP address I have, and you can see that this belongs to the Microsoft Corporation. So that's what I mentioned earlier, where if you don't do anything right now, the default way is that Microsoft will just assign you an implicit public IP address. But this is not great for a production setting because there's no telling when this will change. Like, you cannot guarantee you will have the same public IP address all the time. If you have any integrations or any workflows that depend on the IPs not changing, which is usually the way, this is definitely not good enough for a production setting. Okay, but how do we fix this then? Like, how do we make sure that we don't want to spend all our money and our brain power on a firewall, but we do want some security here. First, I would usually fix the virtual machine name. I'm not going to do it this time because it'll redeploy the virtual machine. But that aside, we want to actually start creating our NAT gateway then. So let's declare it. So we can see we have a NAT gateway. We can call it this. I don't remember exactly all the properties this takes. The prefix, I think, is NAT gateway. The resource group, this is easy. Location, thank you. Yeah, okay, so I should have thought of that, but we do need a public IP address to assign to this NAT gateway. We'll call it this. To save on a little bit of time, I'm gonna accept that. I want the allocation method to be static. I want the SKU for this actually to be standard. And I actually have to do something more. I have to say which zone this belongs to. What does zone mean? Zone in this context is the availability zone. So Microsoft provides several data centers through different geographical locations within each region. And you could have zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. Sometimes I think you could maybe have more zones. I don't know if it's constrained to only 3. But if zone 1 goes down, this public IP address is not available. So if you were designing this to be highly resilient and highly available, you would probably include more zones. But in our use case, we're good enough with this. So this looks good. You may be wondering, shouldn't you reference this public IP address somehow inside this NAT gateway? How else does the NAT gateway know which public IP to use? Well, sort of, but we actually have to use a separate resource for that. So there's this thing called Azure RM NAT Gateway Public IP Association. This will just say that, hey, this public IP address needs to be connected to this NAT gateway. So if we choose this one, say this, there's only 2 values we have to supply. We only have to supply the NAT gateway ID, which we have this one, and we have to supply the IP, which is this property. So now these 2 are connected like glue. Although there is one more thing we have to do, because now we have a NAT gateway, we have a public IP, and they are connected, but them on their own, they don't do anything. So like I mentioned before, we have to assign this to a subnet. So we can do that as well. And it's called Subnet NAT Gateway Association. And to save on a little bit of time, I'll accept those. So now it's actually being connected. So I think we are ready to deploy here. I will run apply again. I have to supply the password. And now we can see, so we have a few different things happening. For some reason it wants to remove the managed identity that was somehow thrown on. I think when I utilized the run as command in the portal, I think a managed identity somehow is being applied. Or if this is coming from somewhere else, maybe some policy I have, not sure. But what we care about is the NAT gateway that will be created. We are also creating a public IP association and the public IP itself. Oh, I actually remember. We have, this is not going to work, I don't think. We have to fix one more thing. We have to make sure that we are enabling this in the same zone as the public IP address. If the zone where the public IP address lives, if this goes down, then the NAT gateway, if that's in another zone, like it's not going to work because it can't contact its public IP. So we just have to make sure that's the same. But everything else here looks good, so I will cancel out of that. Apply again. I will make sure that the public IP address is in zone 1 and the NAT gateway is also in zone 1 now. So we can say yes to this. Now if we go back to our resource group, we can see we have a NAT gateway, and if I click into this, I can see on the left here I have an outbound IP address. This is the IP we created. So this one ends in 176.178. So remember that. And now then if we go back to our machine, if you remember from before, the public IP address, it started with like 4 dot something. I hope we don't see that now. So run this. So now we have a different IP address, and to me this looks pretty good. Just to make sure though, we copy it, we go into the public IP resource, and we have a match. So this means that any new virtual machine being deployed into this subnet will use source network address translation to translate their private IP address into this public IP address. And yeah, we like that. Alright guys, so that pretty much concludes the video. Before I've not made an outro like this. I figured I'd test it. I've also not tried using a Facecam for the videos, so I'm testing this as well. I think for some parts where it's more explaining and more wordy, cutting to the Facecam may be good, but please provide feedback on that if you like it or if you don't like it. And like the general flow of the videos, do you think it's good? Should I change something? I get a lot of feedback, so don't take offense if you provide feedback and this doesn't change to the next video, but I take all feedback into consideration and I sift through it, and I will try different things in different videos, like this I mean, this video, how this one works, will not be the same for my 150th video, I hope. So, but yeah, that's it for the video, guys. Hope you guys are having a great day, and take care.